name is Lama Ranjus. I am the Middle East and North Africa Ambassador at WSP, and I will be your moderator today. The objective of this webinar is to discuss with experts the issue of water scarcity and to build better understanding of the impact of water scarcity on a human movement. But before we start, just a housekeeping note. This event will last for 60 minutes. So for the attendees, please keep your mic muted. If you have any question, please place it at the chat box, and hopefully we will have time at the end of the session to take some of those questions. Or if you want, you can also ask for the floor by raising the raise your hand button. This webinar is recorded and it will be posted on our website in a couple of days' time. So first, I would like to introduce the Water Science Policy co-founder, Silvia Cartia. She will give you the quick overview of our science policy platform. To you, Silvia.
Thank you, Lama, and good afternoon, good morning, and hi, everybody. And first of all, I would like to welcome you all. This is a very exciting time for Water Science Policy, which is a platform that was launched only 6 months ago and in the middle of the pandemic. As Lama said before, I am one of the co-founders together with Chris, and you will meet him later. We are friends and ex-classmates, and we have studied together at Oxford a couple of years ago. So during lockdown in May, and while we were figuring out how to survive in our new virtual realities and looking for different ways of connecting to each other, we saw multiple gaps. First of all, there's one between disciplines, and mainly in the natural and social sciences. And second, across narratives. That means those of academics, professionals, social activists, just to mention a few. So many of us in this room today work in the broad realm of water and development, but we actually don't often talk to each other. And so we decided to team up, and this is where WSP came about. First of all, to bridge these gaps. So what exactly is water science policy? It is a digital platform to facilitate open access science communication on a broad range of topics at the intersection of water, nature, and society with a holistic approach. So our mission is really to offer a free space where researchers, professionals, storytellers, photojournalists, just to name a few, from all around the world can publish their work and express their opinions about water and related topics. We strongly believe that this should be science-based, but also accessible to all. Water, as we all know, is of vital importance for each single aspect of our everyday life. And we want to raise more awareness and broader understanding on the invisible linkages that exist and underpin our well-being and also those of the health of our planet. So water science policy really offers a worldwide coverage and bridges together geographies, also thanks to the work of our editors and of our regional ambassadors, without whom all this wouldn't be possible. And so Lama, that you see here today, she's one of our great ambassadors, but we have many of others in our room today. They all bring the same level of passion, energy, vision, and we're all connected by the same curiosity for science, social justice, and also how to inform better policies. So today, we really hope that you will enjoy the discussion with our excellent panelists. They kindly offered their time to share their valuable insights today. So we feel very honored to have them in the room. Thank you again. And on behalf of Water Science Policy, we really hope that you will enjoy the webinar. And also please feel free to engage with the platform and to get in touch with us. Thank you, and over to you again, Lama.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. So as you mentioned, that we have today 4 guest speakers, and I will introduce them before they speak, and now I will also introduce them to you. We have Michaela Melto from the UNESCO. We have also Sushmita Mandal from the International Water Association. We don't have them physically, but we also have the presentation of the Professor Troy Sternberg from University of Oxford, and also we have Sarah Walker from the World Resource Institute. Also, we have Kai Hitman from the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, who will be interviewing the speakers afterward. So our first speaker today is Michaela Milto. She's the Deputy Coordinator of the World Water Assessment Program at UNESCO. So over to you, Michaela. You'll present some of your work on the impact of climate change and water and how that affecting the most vulnerable. So thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Lama. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sylvia and the team for inviting me, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody in the world. Okay, so I can start my my presentation, and you are so kind maybe to screen the to share the screen. Okay, so that's we can go on the second slide. In this presentation, I would like to talk about connections. So water, for example, is an important connector, being at the very center of the environmental, social, and economic dimension of the sustainable development. Look at this at this map. For the first time at the 2020 World Economic Forum in Davos, the Risk Perception Survey has ranked climate change and related environmental issues like loss of biodiversity as the top 5 risks in terms of likelihood. Not only, but the climate action failure, the major global risk, has been considered directly interconnected with other global risks like extreme weather and biodiversity loss, but also food crisis, water crisis, and involuntary migration. Climate change manifests itself with an increasing frequency and magnitude of extreme events that trigger water-related disasters, which in turn highly affect communities and land and make societies very vulnerable and miserable. Think about this data. 74% of all natural disasters between 2001 and 2018 were water related, and during the past 20 years, floods and drought affected over 3 billion people, with a total economic damage of almost 700 billion US dollars, with Asia and Africa being the most impacted. The global population is expected to increase up to 9.8 billion by 2015. So the world is growing. And this is, of course, a significant driver of increasing water demand. Cities are the place where population grows more and are often the hope for many people that migrate from degraded or overgrazing or arid lands looking for a job, for a better life. Very often this is not the case. So most vulnerable part of the population move to the outskirts of the city to live in slums. Therefore, we have a situation in which the growing climatic variability has impacts on water availability and quality, which in turn bring to unemployment, progressive dependency on food importation, internal migration from rural to urban areas with the creation of informal human settlement, as I said, social instability, and eventually unrest, conflict, and generalized fragility of the countries. You can well understand that this is a discouraging scenario, especially for young people who eventually decide to migrate. And in these situations, migration becomes a needed decision. It could be either the consequence of failed environmental adaptation, they just couldn't make it, or the only way to adapt climate-induced environmental stresses. Then becoming resilient is an important issue, and it is a gender issue. Indeed, a household's resilience to climate change can be significantly affected by the fact that women are poorly entitled to agricultural resources of both land and water, and that have little time to generate income. Moreover, in case of disaster, women usually have lower mobility than men. Okay, we are at the conclusions. I conclude with some food for thought. A fundamental component of planning for economic growth, social well-being, and environmental sustainability shall be building better resilience to water scarcity and drought in the different communities. Water scarcity and drought should be addressed not only through building infrastructures, but also by improving supplies through efficient practices and managing the increasing demand and conflicts among the different users through a science-informed governance, which recognizes the key role of women and youth and create inclusive and gender-inclusive responsive policies. Okay, and thank you very much. This is the publication that we produce at WAP. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Michaela, for this insightful presentation. It was especially important to highlight the impact of water availability on youth, women, and the most vulnerable. Our second speaker will also talk about this issue, will take us to India. She will share with us how the severe drought affect the farms of Matharwada and how it's impacted the community livelihoods. Happy to give the floor to Sashmita Manda. Sashmita is an independent researcher and she used to work with the International Water Association and manage the Asia Pacific Water Safety Planning Network. Thank you very much to be with us today also, and the floor is yours.
And thank you, Water Science Policy Forum, for this opportunity. So as Lama pointed out, I'm going to focus on India and what really water scarcity means for community livelihoods and natural resource governance, and what are its linkages with migration as a result. So just to give you a quick snapshot, in the context of India, 54% of the country is facing high to extremely high water stress, which means close to 600 million people going without water for a month of the year. So that's the kind of scarcity or the kind of stress that one is talking about in the context of water. And this is happening where India is home to 18% of the world's population and has 4% of the world's freshwater resources and supports 7% of the world's biodiversity as well. So that's the kind of story that's panning out in the context of India. And I'll zoom in into the western state of Maharashtra. 70% of India is semi-arid, and Maharashtra is no different as well. It is one of the wealthiest states in the country and contributes 15% to the annual national GDP, so to say. But agriculture is sort of the foundation on which the fiscal deficit of this state really, if the fiscal health of the state depends. And once we are talking agriculture, we are also talking water, because the availability of the water across the region within Maharashtra itself is very skewed. And as you would see, Marathwada region has 438 cubic meters of water per person, whereas the rest of Maharashtra, when you average it out, is 1,346. So it's in this context that what does scarcity mean and what is happening? I will zoom into the story of Marathwada through my next slide. So talking about Marathwada, as you see, within Maharashtra, it's located pretty much central, in the central part of Maharashtra. The hydrogeology of Marathwada region is mostly basaltic, which is deep rock aquifers. And that's an important point as I am talking about it, because there are no big surface water systems that are there that are naturally occurring. So most of the water is actually groundwater that is used. So what has happened in the context of Marathwada, you do see that it's got 700 millimeter average annual rainfall and has a population of about 18 million people, with agriculture being the key livelihood. Within which, when we are talking about Marathwada, the focus, while there's so little rainfall and there's so little water, the focus is on sugarcane and BT cotton. And that's the problem, because you're talking about a water scarce, a physically water scarce region being pushed to being pushed to grow sugarcane and cotton in some sense because of the policy drivers. And that has had impacts, especially in a context where very easily we do tend to say that climate change is the face of, water scarcity is the face of climate change in some sense, which is true, but then water scarcity is of many kinds. And what is currently happening in Marathwada is it is resulting in households migrating, not just for work, but more importantly for food and water, because both cotton and sugarcane are cash crops. They do not provide you with the necessary food that you need. And if that fails, it therefore becomes a difficult arena to live in. And unfortunately, Marathwada, as a result, has become the farmers' suicide capital of this country because of the number of suicides that have happened due to deaths and due to the loss of crops in the region. So when we are talking about all of this, it's important to also understand how the policy is reacting to it, or what are the policy leverages that have resulted in what has happened so far. And doing that kind of an analysis, and this was analysis that was done as part of the work that Shuchi, who's also part of WSP, and I did while we were at the Nature Conservancy. And the focus has been that we are talking about a reduction in water. When there is no water, what do you talk about? You talk about increasing water infrastructure, so through dams. So Maharashtra is the state which has the most number of dams in this country. And despite that, it has water scarcity. So that's the paradox that one is talking about. And if you see in this infographic as it is, that there is a constant rise in the investment that is going into programs for drought relief, programs for water infrastructure. But when you start looking at that from the perspective of what is happening to the groundwater, and that's the point I was raising in the beginning, that when you start looking at the groundwater, it clearly shows that 71% of the blocks in Maharashtra, and that's close to almost all the blocks in the Marathwada region, which have seen at least a loss of 3 meters, or in some cases even more, in terms of groundwater depletion in the last 5 years. And nobody is talking about this aspect. So this is one side of the story. The other is the entire aspect around agriculture policies and what agriculture policies are pushing. And the point about sugarcane and cotton, which probably shouldn't have been grown here, are being pushed through state processes of minimum support price guarantees, where farmers know that they will definitely get a good price if they grow sugarcane and cotton. So they move on, and then there's a water mining, which is what is resulting in the scarcity, and as a result resulting in migration, because when there's no resources, what do the people do? And it is from this that I would want to propose a couple of things here. That first, when we are talking about water scarcity, and the kind of approach that the state has often taken is reactionary in nature. It is just treating whatever symptoms are being seen in the process. And in doing so, they always look at the community as a beneficiary. They're not seen as active change agents whose knowledge, whose understanding of their ecosystems are important. And as a result, this becomes a sort of, one project cycle ends and another project cycle begins, but there is no sustainable solution in sight. And it is in this continued cycle that these problems continue to happen without any understanding of the socio-ecological system as such. And that is where, when we are talking about groundwater is always seen as an individual property. Your land, the water below your land is your water. But the point is the aquifers are common. And when we are talking about common aquifers, we are talking about common management of these aquifers. And when these common property regimes tend to disintegrate, this is what happens. So in some sense, if we are really talking about making changes and bringing about change in landscapes like this, it's common. I mean, 70% of India is a landscape similar to this. It may not be as pronounced. Of course, Marathwada is the epicenter of drought in some sense. But if policymaking has to focus on addressing the issues of scarcity and as well as migration, it really needs to look at understanding aquifers, bringing in plural knowledge systems where you're talking both of the formal and the informal knowledge networks to understand what's happening to the socio-ecology of the region, to be able to therefore address and grapple with some of these questions. And I'd like to leave with that policymaking has to focus on institutional frameworks, on looking at groundwater as a common resource to tackle the issue of scarcity and migration. And with that, I'll leave you and look forward to the conversations here on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sashmita, for your presentation. Actually, Matrada is represent a lot of areas on the world. It's an issue really common. The drought is indeed one of the biggest threats of many aspects of our lives. But how, as you said, it's not the lack of water or the shortage of water, it's the policies, it's how we are managing water. So water scarcity issue also very much presented in a different way, less to do with the quantity and more so with the water quality and the problem of water contamination also. This is what our next speaker will highlight in his presentation. Professor Troy Sternberg is a senior research associate at the School of Geography and the Environment of the University of Oxford. He's not with us physically today, as I mentioned, but we have his presentation and he will talk about the quality of water issue as well.
It's a pleasure to be here today and to participate and speak to Water Science Policy Forum. I think it's a great idea when graduates and students come together, work, show their initiative to advance the important water issues. Today I want to take you on a trip to somewhere far away, to Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia, to address some of these same water issues in a very different context. My talk's titled Frog in a Bucket, and we'll go through some slides here to get to the point of the frog test for water quality. So I'm starting here with a picture of the road that we take to get to the main mine, Alabuka, in southwestern Kyrgyzstan. You'll notice the dramatic geography. Kyrgyzstan is the highest country in the world, average elevation, 3,000 meters. And you see the river coming down to the left that goes to villages, farms, livestock, and to a reservoir then that feeds the people of Alabuka, the regional district town. So here's a map of Kyrgyzstan placed in ex-Soviet Central Asia, one of the 5 stans. So it's a unusual place, very scenic, nice people. I certainly recommend you go there. And then you can have much empathy, sympathy, and understanding of their water issues. So I look at mining often and the impact on the environment, and we have 2 big sites here. Kumtor Gold Mine, it's a Canadian company that's responsible for 10% of the economy of the country, so it's very important. It's over 4,000 meters, and basically the company cuts away at this glacier in order to access the gold and the minerals in the ground. So very dramatic, and of course it'll affect water resources and supply in the future. The other site is Sultan Sare, where our team was out there last July in 2019. Then in August, the local people were mad at the mine. Their complaints are about water, about environment, about pasture, and lack of jobs. So many disagreements continued with the mine over some years. They complained to the government, nothing happened. What they did then is storm the mine, tear down the walls. The Chinese workers were evacuated, and what appeared to be like a disaster internationally actually was quite successful because the people closed the mine, the Chinese left, and the water was no longer being polluted. So very dramatic. And what this did is teach Kyrgyz that if you protest, then you get results. It's a poor country. You see here the horse bringing the fodder for the animals for the winter, low development levels. And the other picture here, we have very dramatic snow on the roads, very hard to travel and to get to the resources, but also to get to towns and services. So here we are on our road. We're going to make a left there, follow the dirt track, and end up at Full Gold Mine. It's a Chinese mega investment. It's supposed to be over $100 million. And it's hidden behind a hill, so the people don't really know what's going on. Most of the workers are Chinese, so there's not a local source of information. And of course, at the bottom of the hill is the river. As you can imagine, the water comes in the river, is processed, goes back out, and the local residents claim that it's unprocessed when it goes in the water. And then downstream, it's what they drink, their animals drink, and what irrigates the fields and vegetable farms. So it's a dramatic setting, hidden in the mountains. If we go further downstream from the big mine, we have some strip mining that's been done by smaller companies. That they come in, they bulldoze the landscape, process the sediments, and disappear. So, of course, the fear, and probably justifiable, is that everything, the chemicals, etc., wash into the river. That brings us here to the frog in the bucket. It's an interesting test, and how it's described is that the villagers, they go to the reservoir, they get a bucket of water, they put a frog in, and within 15 minutes, the frog dies. This is something they've repeated. Many different people told me about this infamous test. I didn't see it myself. It wasn't the right time, apparently, but they're convinced that the frogs die because of the pollution in the river. Now, the issue with this, or the challenge, is that the politicians are aware of it, but don't believe it. If you take it to the central government, of course, they're not going to believe it. The mine staff also gives no credence to it. If the people push, there's pushback from the powers that be, the police and the mine staff. So the people know, the people are convinced, but how do you convince another audience? I, as an outsider, suggested water quality test strips for very little money. You could test the quality, the villagers could test the quality once a day or whatever regime they wanted and see if it's good or bad. But as they explained to me, that doesn't work, because if it's bad, no one will believe them, and they might even encounter some opposition or even violence, so they don't want to do that. And if it's good, the villagers and the townspeople will not believe it. So they're in a conundrum where there's not a way to resolve the issue of how to test and for water quality and what to believe is actually the true results, pollution levels. We may think that that's resolvable. It's become an intractable issue in the country, and truly the country has other issues even greater. As they look at this, though, there are international standards, the IFC, the EITI, Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, that try and address this. But as I mentioned, the Kyrgyz politics is very volatile. In October of this year, the president resigned and an ex-convict took his place. How that happened is quite incredible, but that just tells you there's a weak institutional governance in the country, and they're not really able to deal with smaller issues like water pollution, even if the frog in the bucket dies. So I want to just say more research is needed, and that's where you come in. There's many things people can do. I encourage you to go out to Central Asia. My time with the University of Central Asia has been very productive. And one of your graduates, Luke Renfield-Shaw, actually went out there to teach for a semester. So there's much you can do. We can read about it in this paper, but more important is try and communicate some of your skills and your knowledge to the local communities. All the best with your forum.
So with the Professor Sternberg thoughts on the issue of water contamination and the issue of failure of policy, the weak governance, and containing the war-related issue, I would like to introduce our last speaker for today, Sarah Walker. Sarah is a senior manager for water quality and agriculture in the water program. She will speak about what governments and the international development community need to work on to mitigate and adapt to climate change and the impacts it has on the water, energy, food nexus. So the floor is yours, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Lama. And Christian, thank you for sharing my slides. So as Lama said, I'm Sarah Walker from the World Resources Institute. We're a global research organization that works at the intersection of the environment, economic development, and human well-being. And I was asked to present today on a recent commentary that I published on water, energy, and food insecurity. So I'm going to discuss how these resources are intertwined and why they must be tackled together to sustain human well-being over time, particularly in the face of a changing climate. In the background note for this webinar, if you read it, and as Shushmita very clearly illustrated, a case study on India, where in 2016, a severe drought affected half the country. There wasn't enough water for cooling, so thermal power plants shut down. Crop failures caused farmers to migrate to overcrowded cities. Many of these farmers were burdened with debt. Some even committed suicide. India is not alone, however. Syria is another powerful example of how water insecurity can have a snowball effect, impacting, at least in part, the stability of an entire region. Prior to Syria's civil war in 2011, government policies ramped up food production and subsidized groundwater pumping for irrigation. And Syria's withdrawals exceeded the renewable supply of water. Syria then faced the worst drought on record, and with no reserves to fall back on, the country was in crisis. Experts suggest that the drought displaced as many as 1.5 million people and played a role in Syria's civil war. So there are many areas around the world that face water insecurity. WRI, the World Resources Institute, estimates that 17 countries, home to 1/4 of the world's population, face extremely high water stress, meaning their water withdrawals are too high relative to the annual renewable supply. And then we estimate another 27 face high water stress. And the trends aren't favorable. Climate change is causing more severe droughts while demand for water increases, threatening sustainable development, livelihoods, and stability. And we estimate that by 2040, the number of countries facing extremely high water stress could nearly double. So I want to show you in this figure how interconnected water is with food and energy. As many of you probably know, water is essential for producing food and for generating energy. Energy is needed to supply water and to produce food, and food transports water and can be used to produce energy. So these resources are all connected in a chain that's really only as strong as its weakest link. And these resources are increasingly threatened by climate change and by growing demands. If we look at energy, more energy will be needed to power developing cities and bring energy access to remote areas of the world. But to limit the impacts of climate change, it must be clean and renewable. Thermal power plants require a large amount of water for cooling. According to WRI's analysis, as you see on this map, 1/3 of thermal energy production is in areas of high water stress, threatened by potential water shortages. So all the little different colored dots you see are different types of energy generation, and then the yellow through dark red shading shows the level of water stress, with the darker red areas being higher water stress. If we look at the next slide, this also is looking at water stress, and it's looking at water stress specifically in areas where crops are produced. So we have a finite amount of water and land, but we still must produce more food to feed a growing population. And already more than 800 million people are going to bed hungry. While farmers, companies, and governments figure out how to produce more food, this must not be done at the expense of forests or water resources. Yet already half of the world's irrigated cropland, as you see on this map, is in areas of high water stress. And if we look at rain-fed cropland, the amount facing extremely high risk of seasonal variability, which could indicate more severe wet or dry seasons, is projected to more than quadruple between 2010 and 2040. As we saw in India and Syria, without effective management, drought and other threats to these resources can have devastating rippling effects across these sectors. And while many researchers have studied this nexus concept, it's largely remained just that, it's a concept. The challenge now is to move from understanding to action by mainstreaming nexus management. Protecting these resources from escalating risks due to climate change and growing urbanizing populations should really be at the top of the international development agenda. So I suggest in this commentary 3 pillars that could provide a more solid foundation for the international development community to holistically manage this nexus and catalyze more effective, more collaborative investments on the ground. So these 3 pillars are knowledge, governance, and cooperation. So first, knowledge. The interlinkages across these sectors are really complex, and good data to understand them are often lacking. So we need better nexus data from the global scale down to the local level to target high priority locations, to evaluate co-benefits and trade-offs, to layer in social and economic factors, and forecast future conditions. And we need investments in monitoring and modeling to fill these data gaps. And arguably, I would say equally as important, we really need investments in translating these data into actionable information that the development community can then use to set their strategies and make investment decisions. The second pillar is governance. So if we can equip these decision makers with the data and actionable information, that's a great first step. But the challenge then is to ensure that the data are used to make proactive, coherent, and equitable decisions. So we really need capacity building that empowers decision makers to act collaboratively and with a sense of urgency. So for example, tools could help that are used to comprehensively evaluate investment options using a common lens, one that's focused not just on water or food or energy in isolation, but that factors in all of these resource concerns, plus social equity and economic considerations. And we can really then generate co-benefits with our investments and reduce unintended harm across other sectors. And then finally, the third pillar is cooperation. So water is local, but it doesn't know political boundaries. So the best planning and management in any single place is fruitless if done in isolation. So we need more shared strategies with a common vision for basins to ensure there will be enough clean water to produce food, generate energy, and meet other needs. So right now, there are trillions of dollars that will be spent on coronavirus recovery. And experts are calling for a great reset in order to build back better. So the international development community has a unique window of opportunity to turn the status quo on its head and think about sustainability and social issues holistically across these sectors and borders, and engage all stakeholders and decision makers, ensure no one is left behind, and really start to think beyond preparing for or recovering from the next drought or the next crisis, and instead be more proactive and resilient. So that's a really brief synopsis. If you're interested in reading more, yeah, perfect timing, thank you. I have the link included here to the full commentary, and it provides more information. It also includes 3 case studies on Zimbabwe, Cambodia, and Pakistan, where water, energy, and food crises are coming to a head. And I didn't have time to cover these in my remarks today, but I think these really provide eye-opening insights into the complexity of the nexus on the ground, and also how it's being compounded right now by the coronavirus pandemic. So thank you very much for having me today, and happy to answer any questions or address any comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Actually, it's really very interesting presentation. I read your article, and as you and Sushmita also mentioned the importance of the participation of all stakeholders in finding solutions, especially the community. Also, like you highlighted how stress can lead to conflicts, and it's already happening. And in the future, there is like more likely to happen. I personally have a lot of questions already for all the speakers. So now we will move to our discussion. I would like to present the UN Measure Group on Children and Youth Focal Point on Climate Change and Migration, Kyle Hitman, who is a human rights lawyer based in San Diego, USA, and he is specialized in international environment and international migration. Kyle prepared a couple of questions to ask the speakers, and also we'll move to the Q&A and see if anyone from the participants in this event have any question. Kyle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lama. So I've got one question for each of you, and then I wrote some more down during your presentations, just if there's time at the end. So we'll start with Sushmita. So Sushmita, in your presentation, you spoke about the effects of water scarcity in the largely agricultural region of Marathwada. Of course, like one common effect of such a resource shortage, in agrarian areas is migration into cities, either internal migration or even cross-boundary migration, but rural to urban migration. And this can lead to rapid urbanization. And a prominent example of this phenomenon is in the Indian city of Chennai, where a population explosion and the resulting urban expansion decimated local water supplies. And this culminated in the 2019 water crisis in Chennai. And I was wondering if you could talk more about this and explain what like states and municipalities and the international community could do at the policy level to prevent water shortages in these rapidly urbanizing areas.
Thanks, Kyle, for that question. It's a complex question, and there are several layers to answer that question. But I'll just start with some caveats first. And one of the first caveats that I really wanted to highlight and acknowledge here was that migration and urbanization are not linearly correlated. I mean, they are related, but they cannot be, it's not that this happens and that happens. So like in the context, and I will base my discussions through my experiences from Asia Pacific really, where what we see is that urbanization is happening at a rate where the state is looking at urban centers as key nerve centers for economic development, at the cost of not providing for services or opportunities in the agrarian, in the rural areas, so to say. That's one point that I wanted to highlight and flag in some sense. Also, within migrants, there are different kinds of migrants. I mean, we are talking about an expert like me, or say a IT engineer, who also is probably a migrant to the city of Chennai, for example, in this context. But the kind of access a person who is an engineer would have, as opposed to a farmer who's lost his livelihood and is just looking for another source of income, and is therefore probably a casual construction worker or whatever, has very different accesses to resources when they are moving into that urban space. And that's what complicates migration as a tool as well, because while we do say that migration is an adaptive mechanism in a lot of contexts, and in resource scarce regions, that has been always used as a tool to address resource scarcity. But coming down to your key question, which was really about what is it that the state or the municipalities or the international development world can do in terms of policy changes to talk about addressing water scarcity in a rapidly urbanizing context. And I'll use the Chennai case because, like you said, Chennai did face a 1 in 100-year drought in 2019. And I must remind you that Chennai was also faced a 1 in 100-year flood in 2016, just 3 years before that. So it's, and as I was saying, that water is really the face of climate change in some sense, because there is an extremity involved, which is showing up these events in a very big way. But the key things that local bodies, that communities, that the civil society can really do in addressing water scarcity in these kind of contexts is first, probably look at proactive citywide planning of resources, not just water resources, but all resources. And when we are saying water, often it is the visible water resources that get talked about and never the invisible water resource, which is groundwater. And in the context of India, I can tell you that 80% of our drinking water is groundwater based. And that's getting polluted. And if we are not aware of what is happening to that's something that really needs to be looked at. We are talking about an era where dryness is going to happen. I mean, there is a certain amount of drying of the system that's anyways happening. And in this context, how important is it to really talk about also managing demand, also managing how are we more appropriately using the water that is available. And that's something that definitely needs a lot more work and a lot more focus, because it's not just a supply side. It's not just about increasing infrastructure and increasing processes by which water is available. And when we're talking migration, and that's something that I want to again highlight, which is key across the Asia Pacific region really, is this whole idea of migration is there are poorer people and there are middle class and richer people. The poorer people who are migrating into the cities are often seen as people without citizenship rights. So they never have access to that resource. And they are always at the receiving end of trying to make both ends meet. They didn't have water back in their villages and they don't have water here. So that's the kind of place where you have to look at it. I'm sorry I'm taking too long, but that's about it. I will leave it at that.
Really interesting discussion, but we are like running out of time. Yeah. And also we have a video to present from our colleague. She's supposed to be here with us, but unfortunately she couldn't make it. So she sent her video. Our ambassador, Sushi Bora, please present her video.
Hi, I'm Shuchi and I'm Regional Ambassador South Asia for the Water Science Policy Platform. I'm excited to be a part of this first webinar that we've organized. My 2 cents on the topic. I feel if we look at migration as a systemic problem due to water scarcity, or in fact water scarcity as a systemic problem, we will be able to identify that the solution lies in proactive management. Proactive management of droughts and providing people a reason to stay rather than having to migrate due to the stresses of resource scarcity. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
I will thank her virtually. Thank you, Sushi, for this video. And we will go for the second question from Kyle, but please, I'm really sorry, but we will, if we can have a concise answer, just because of the time. We can go like for more than 2 hours in this discussion, but we really want to finish in 1 hour. Thank you for your understanding. Please, Kai, go ahead.
All right, so my next question will be for Sarah. So Sarah, in your commentary for the World Resources Institute, the triple threat, water, energy, and food security, which is really interesting, and I would encourage everyone to read it. So you wrote about hydroelectric dams in Cambodia and Pakistan, and specifically you touched on some of the negative ecological effects they can have. But unfortunately, the hastened construction of hydroelectric dams has become commonplace in much of the global south, as multinational energy companies reap the benefits of what should ostensibly be investment in green energy. And oftentimes the resulting environmental damage leads to compounding effects like internal displacement. So what can policymakers do to address the needs of persons displaced by international development projects? And what can they do to keep those projects from leading to displacement in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. It's a really good question. And yeah, in the commentary, I spend a little bit of time discussing particularly the construction of a large dam in the Pakistan case study, where there are displacement concerns among many other potential economic, environmental, political issues with the dam. So let me first say I am no expert in this particular case, but I do want to highlight a couple of kind of overarching points regarding these kinds of international development projects. So first, I would say this really gets back to the point of needing stakeholder engagement in the planning processes. By engaging the local stakeholders and communities early on, we can ensure their interests and their needs are addressed, and they're balanced with the ecological needs and the needs for water, food, and energy security. So that can really help, I think, lead to more informed decisions that are not only effective at solving a specific problem, but also equitable, and perhaps even can generate additional benefits. And then the second point that I want to make is back to this idea that I mentioned in my recommendations, that when thinking about these kinds of investment decisions, if we can employ some comprehensive evaluation methods that evaluate potential projects with that common lens. So you're not just evaluating the costs and benefits of a dam with respect to water resources, but you're really robustly pulling in other resource concerns, economic, social issues, and by doing so, help mitigate unintended harm in other areas, and also promote co-benefits. So an example I provide in the commentary is that tools like this could potentially highlight more value for things like small-scale storage with supplemental irrigation that's targeted at smallholder farmers, because they would not only increase water security, but also food security and help to alleviate poverty. And this would be in contrast to something like this large-scale dam that's built for water security, but where the water may be primarily used for commercial irrigation of commodity exports, and therefore doesn't really equitably address the local water and food security of the local people who are really dependent on how these resources are managed. So I'll leave it at those kind of two overarching points. And if anyone else has expertise in this area, I would love to hear your thoughts too.
Thank you, Sarah. Kyle, can we go to the third question, please?
Yep, thank you, Sarah. So my last question will be for Michaela. So in your report for UNESCO titled Migration and its Interdependencies with Water Security, Gender, and Youth Employment, you wrote at length about the linkages between water usage, environmental degradation, and migration from arid and semi-arid regions. I live in California, where a common statistic you hear is that 80% of our water is used for 2% of our economy, which refers to the resource demands of the state's agricultural sector. And this is due in large part to corporate and private farms' insistence on growing water-intensive crops in a desert climate, which is an inherently unsustainable practice. But meanwhile, California's population is still growing on account of the West Coast being the best coast. And so in situations like this, where rapid population growth is coupled with resource overuse in private industry, how can governments intervene to regulate water use? And what would these regulations look like? And how would they be enacted in relevant regions?
Kyle, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
It's a super complex question. You do a complex question to everybody, but this, I hope you are not expecting that I can solve the well-known water problems of California. But anyway, so I'm trying to answer to your question. California has the largest water system distribution in the world, and it's also very controversial one. It seems to me that this is primarily a political issue rather than a regulation problem, because California has regulations, has very clear rules and laws in the water management. And it is also an outstanding example of uses and user conflicts at the water nexus between agriculture with the food production, the massive food production that there is in that area, the environment in consideration of the environmental water, the environmental flow that you need to have, and also vis-a-vis with the challenges of the climate change and the industrial and domestic uses. Sarah talked about nexus, and this is the case with conflicts. Being primarily a political issue, awareness raising and sensibilization on the need for participatory process, including all the stakeholders, could be attempt in view of reconciling all these competitive water uses, and also to balance the needs of the different stakeholders, the multiple interests and the power behind this interest, which includes also the climate change and the environmental water that maybe they don't have a voice, but maybe yes, in terms of scientists, in terms of environmentalists, etc. So, and also the rapid population growth, as you said. In fact, California and the US is not a country in which there is migration. People are not leaving, people are received. So it is a destination country. And this can cause an additional stress to water resources. So it is very important to have a very good integrated water resources management combined with, in this case, with a human-based approach governance. And this is key. But of course, it is a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. And turn back over to Lama.
And thank you all for this really great discussion. And I think there is a question being answered in the Q&A box. So thank you, Sushmita. It was a question for you. Thank you for answering it. And now I will pass to our other co-founder of Water Science Policy, Chris Fisher, to conclude this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone, for joining, and my sincere gratitude from all of us at WSP for making this session possible, and especially to the speakers, to Michaela and Sushmita and Troy and Sarah and also Kyle as a panelist, who all came on and prepared their presentations on the topics and shared their work and their opinions. And of course, thanks Lama for the great moderation, and everyone that joined us here today. I think we were at almost 50 participants at some point, which was really nice. And finally, I'd like to echo what Sylvia shared in the beginning, that our mission at Water Science Policy is really to bridge the gaps. That means bridging the gaps between the social and natural sciences, between the SDG silos, between the different worlds as well, between academia and professionals and citizens, and to include everyone in that conversation when it comes to water. And we want to do that in a way that is accessible to everyone. That means we aim for simple and comprehensive content, yet showing and communicating rather complex realities, as we've just seen also in a lot of the presentations we heard. And we want to do that free of charge and with through open access, both on the submission as well as the access side to information. And in order to further deliver on our mission in that regard, we have a lot of exciting things over the coming months ahead, as we launch a new website that we're currently building with a lot of new features and tools for discussion and membership, and also launching a photo series. So if you would like to reach out to fellow photographers or professionals that maybe want to participate and have their work showcased, we're very happy to have them on. Of course, water related. And also we're trying to really move away from a sort of Anglo-centric approach to really having articles and content available in all sorts of different languages. And that will be possible by the click of a button for the content that we have on the website. And yes, so we're going to become, or we're trying to become a thing or a hub for all things water. And we encourage everyone today here and you to be part of the journey. And also encourage you to submit your work to us if you would like to raise awareness for a certain issue that you're passionate about and you want to write about, and you want to make it accessible to a broader audience. And writing a journalistic version of your research, for example, or your work, quickly just laying out the main takeaways is a great way to do that. And lastly, I'd like to point out that we have another webinar coming up January, February about sort of the source to sea or hilltop to ocean, the H2O approach between freshwater and marine resources, linking SDG 6 and SDG 14, and where we'll explore the importance of that H2O approach and what managing freshwater and integrated water resource management means for integrated coastal management, and yeah, how little these worlds sometimes talk to one another, and the problem that fragmented governance poses, which some of you also alluded to in your presentations. And again, we'll have a lot of really renowned experts and very knowledgeable folks on the call, and we look forward for your participation and interest, and we'll keep you posted. So stay tuned, and thanks a lot for coming out today, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all for this great webinars. It was a pleasure to moderate such a session. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.